Israel. Bienvenidos. Bienvenue. Ahlan wa sahlan, and welcome to the webinar COVID-19 and the Ombudsperson, Rising to the Challenge of a Pandemic. The international webinar has been organized by the Ombudsman Institution of Israel together with the IOI. Mr. Peter Tindall, IOI President, Mr. Matanyahu Engelman, State Controller and Ombudsman of Israel, Mr. Werner Ramon, IOI Secretary General, IOI Regional Presidents, distinguished Ombudspersons, dear participants from over 50 countries, warm greetings to you all. My name is Ronit Zandberg. I am the Vice Head of the Office of the Ombudsman of Israel, and I'll be the presenter of this webinar during the next 2 hours. We are delighted and grateful that you have joined us for this webinar. As we are all aware, viruses do not recognize borders. The present pandemic, which has reached the four corners of the earth, demonstrates to us, again, that the human physiology does not differentiate between nations, ethnicity, or gender. However, some of us suffer from the pandemic's social and economic consequences more than others. The coronavirus crisis is a global crisis and obligates every country, including the ombuds institutions of those countries, to take special measures to deal with it. The State Controller and Ombudsman of Israel has initiated this webinar in recognition of the importance of peer learning and the exchange of knowledge between the ombuds institutions around the world that are coping with similar challenges. I am confident that this conference will be a success and will act as an effective and important platform for learning between colleagues. I would like to thank the IOI and its senior management for endorsing the event and contributing to its organization. The webinar is due to last 2 hours. We will make every effort to stay on schedule. However, since the event is taking place live and includes an online interactive survey, it is possible that we will exceed the time limit. We apologize for this in advance. I wish to point out that the whole conference is transcribed and to make it accessible for persons with disabilities and is also interpreted simultaneously into French, Spanish, and Arabic. The webinar will be opened by the IOI President and Ombudsman of Ireland. He will be followed by the State Controller and Ombudsman of Israel and by the IOI Secretary General member of the Austrian Ombudsman Board. The greetings will be followed by the lecture of the head of the Office of the Ombudsman of Israel. After this, we will hear lectures by the presidents of the 6 IOI regions: Africa, North America, Europe, Caribbean and Latin America, Australasia and Pacific, and Asia. This part will be concluded by the interventions of the President of the Venice Commission and the President of the AOM. We will then watch several short, pre-recorded interventions. We wish to thank everyone who took the time and effort to prepare an intervention. Regretfully, due to time limitations, we will not be able to show them all. A link to the other interventions, as well as a link to a recording of this webinar, will be sent to you after the event. We will conclude the webinar with a short, interactive live survey in which you are invited to participate. This survey will review how the ombuds institutions around the world are coping with the pandemic. And now, it is my great pleasure to invite Mr. Peter Tindall, IOI President and Ombudsman of Ireland, to open the webinar. Mr. Tindall, you are invited to take the floor.
Very much, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to join you all. Can I first take the opportunity to thank the Ombudsman for Israel for hosting this important conference on a theme which has dominated the work of Ombudsman offices worldwide in 2020. The emergence of the global pandemic has posed two distinct challenges. The first is the requirement to continue to operate our services in the new circumstances in which we find ourselves. Can you hear me, if not see me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Shall I continue?
Mr. Tyndall, we can hear you very well.
Okay, I shall continue. The first challenge that we face is the requirement to continue to operate our services in the new circumstances in which we find ourselves. The second is that of ensuring that those people at most risk of exclusion, discrimination, and poor services in our communities have their rights protected. In this latter context, our work is more important than ever. The Ombudsman community is a very well-connected one. We knew of this because of the highly effective networks we've developed to share best practice, drive up standards, and support colleagues who are facing threats. The IOI, as our General Secretary will highlight, has played a central and developing role in this work. As it transpired, we also turned out to be pretty well connected digitally. The speed with which colleagues worldwide adapted to the new situation and got their services back up and running was inspirational. With many having to operate in varying degrees of lockdown, we nonetheless managed to allow members of the public to continue to bring their complaints to us and acted upon them. Many also used own initiative powers to tackle emerging issues. We proved ourselves to be ready for new challenges and nimble and effective in responding to them. I should at this point also pay tribute to the public services across the world who work so hard to tackle the impact of COVID-19. The health and care workers in the front line had to deal with large increases in demand for their services and deal with the needs of people with the disease in often very challenging circumstances. The huge mortality in the early days was a sobering reminder of how fragile our communities can be in the face of such a threat. Health and care workers themselves were also at great personal risk, and I would like to pay tribute here to those who sadly lost their lives caring for others. Other public services and servants have also had to step up to the mark in introducing measures to sustain the economy, to provide income to those who lost their jobs, to provide access to services online, and in many other ways. They've earned our gratitude. Our governments have responded in many different ways across the globe, some with notably more success than others. In the end, they will have to answer to their electorates for how they did. However, for the Ombudsman community, we have a great need to be vigilant on behalf of those at most risk. As we've heard, the virus hasn't respected equal opportunities. It has disproportionately affected older people and disabled people, especially those in care homes. It has affected those in institutional settings, such as prisons and accommodation for asylum seekers and refugees. It has impacted on poor people, on homeless people, and people from minority ethnic backgrounds. It has exposed the divisions and inequalities in our societies. Many of those disproportionately affected find it harder to speak up, and it's incumbent on us to ensure that their voices are heard. Every 4 years, the IOI brings the global Ombudsman community together for its General Assembly and World Conference. This year's event was due to be held in Dublin, and I'd look forward to welcoming colleagues to Ireland and having an opportunity to share experiences and explore best practices. The theme of the conference was giving voice to the voiceless. The plenary sessions and workshops were to be targeted on exploring the issues around people who have less opportunity to access services and who conversely rely greatly upon them. Inevitably, like many other events, our General Assembly and World Conference had to be postponed and will now take place online in May of next year. However, the theme is more important than ever in the context of COVID-19. I'm well aware of the work of the Ombudsman community worldwide in reaching out to people in institutional care. My own office was already working on a major report into the circumstances of disabled people under 65 who were in nursing homes for older people because of the lack of appropriate support within their own communities. Two of the people we interviewed sadly died during the course of the pandemic. The number of older people who've died in care homes is one of the international consequences that has been of huge concern. The same applies to other people, such as those with intellectual disabilities who are in institutional settings. Making sure that we do all we can to prevent further deaths and learn the lessons for the future will preoccupy many of us. The way in which Ombudsman offices have taken the many challenges thrown up by the pandemic in their strides is highly impressive. We will face more challenges about access to treatment and to vaccines as the situation develops. The UK Parliamentary Ombudsman Rob Behrens conducted a survey of IOI members during the pandemic. His concentration on leadership is well reflected in his initial findings, which he published on his website. Our role in providing leadership in our societies is now more important than ever. We're often the first to know what's wrong in our public services. Our casework gives us a huge evidence base from which to drive improvement and highlight shortcomings. Our communities are facing unprecedented challenges. We must ensure that the resources at our disposal are fully and effectively focused on protecting the rights of those most at risk and learning the lessons for the future. I look forward to hearing examples of the work of colleagues from around the world, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall, for your important perspective. And now, I would like to invite the host of the webinar, Mr. Mataniyahu Engelman, State Controller and Ombudsman of Israel.
It is a true pleasure for me to welcome you to the international webinar on Rising to the Challenge of Pandemic. I would like to open my remarks with greetings and thanks, special thanks to the President of the IOI, Mr. Peter Tyndall, and IOI Secretary General, Mr. Werner Amon, who endorsed the event and who honor us with their presence. I would like to thank our Head of the Office of the Ombudsman, Dr. Advocate Esther Ben-Chaim, for organizing this important webinar. And of course, I would like to thank all of the ombudspersons who participate and take part in this webinar. We are in the midst of an outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is shaking the world and affecting our lives significantly. I believe that it is important for the State Controller and the Ombudsman Office to continue its activities facing the current challenges in order to improve the activity of government authorities and to protect the complainants' rights and exercise the right to proper public service. The Ombudsman institution was established to provide complainants with relief from harm by the act of government authorities. the frequent interaction between the individual and the government authorities and the large number of government authorities that provide services to individuals regularly create a wide platform of friction and a great dependence of the individual on the bureaucratic mechanism. The advantage of the Ombudsman is that he has the authority to intervene not only in actions that deviate from norms and legal rules, but also when the authorities are acting rigidly or treat the individual in prominent injustice. The services given by the Israel Ombudsman are all accessible, convenient, and free of charge. Ensuring the right of the individual is important at all times, but it's crucial in times of emergencies such as COVID-19 crisis we are all experiencing globally during the past year, which has affected the world in many ways, mainly regarding health and economic aspects. Our main focus when investigating a complaint during the COVID-19 pandemic is to assist the complainant by finding an appropriate solution for his needs. This matter will be discussed in detail in the presentation of the head of the Office of the Ombudsman. I would like to thank the employees of the Ombudsman Office for their work and efforts during challenging time, which was some of the time done remotely. The Ombudsman Office has formulated unique inquiry mechanism and has acted in flexible and creative ways to enable a quick and effective response to individuals. For example, the employees of the Ombudsman Office contacted senior citizens who were Holocaust survivors, who were known to the Ombudsman Office due to their complaints they had filed in the past, made inquiries regarding their welfare, and examined how they could be assisted during this crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic is a global crisis, and Ombudsman institutions around the world have faced the ways it affected the public. As the president of the IOI, Mr. Peter Tyndall, noted, we see great importance in mutual learning and knowledge sharing and in fruitful collaboration between Ombudsman institutions. Accordingly, the Ombudsman Office shared with the international community of Ombudsman institutions information regarding creative ways in which it has operated and is still operating during the crisis. The Ombudsman Office was also constantly updated, among other issues, on the step taken by Ombudsman institutions around the world to become accessible to populations affected by the COVID-19 crisis. As is well known, the State of Israel is the only country in the world in which the state controller also serves as ombudsman. The unification of powers creates added value for both the audit work and the activity of the Ombudsman Office. The combination of roles allows the Ombudsman to closely monitor the public administration in general and also to look into an individual complaint that reveals a flawed administrative system. In such cases, the state controller examines the matter raised in complaint not only from the complainant's point of view, but also from a broader perspective of large public interest. On the other hand, the position of the state controller, which are based on conclusions of audit regarding general issues, also serves as guidance and milestones for inquiring individual complaints regarding those issues. Our office monitored the actions of the government during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic and already then began to investigate complaints and conduct audits on issues related to the COVID-19 crisis and its effects, similar to audits taking place in other countries around the world. As part of the investigation of complaints and the state audit, interim findings were raised whose rectification would improve functioning of the governmental and public systems in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and the service provided to the public. In light of the importance of these issues and the added value inherent in rectifying deficiencies as quickly as possible, I found it appropriate to submit the special report of the Ombudsman and the audit interim findings to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and to publish these reports to the public in September and October 2020. The special report of the Ombudsman dealt with the issue of investigating complaints during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Following the submission of the report, discussions took place in the Knesset, and the public bodies were invited and were required to elaborate on the actions they took to correct the deficiencies that were raised by the Ombudsman in the report. Last week, the special report was published also in the IOI newsletter. Following the submission of the special report, the Ombudsman also held an online webinar on the issue complaints investigating during the COVID-19 crisis for all ombudsperson and those in charge of handling public inquiries in Israel, and representatives of NGOs and the academic world also participated. Over 400 people attended the webinar. This meets the vision according to which the Ombudsman Office will act as a professional home for those in charge of handling public inquiries in all public bodies. The importance of the Ombudsman Office is particularly evident at this time, the midst of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, where the need arises to assist populations affected during and after the crisis, such as elderly, unemployed, and others. In this reality, the importance of ensuring the proper, equitable, fair, and efficient activity of government authority increases. I wish us all interesting, efficient, and fruitful webinar, optimal handling with the COVID-19 crisis, and safe return to return.
I wish now to invite to our virtual floor Mr. Werner Amon, IOI Secretary General and member of the Austrian Ombudsman Board. Mr. Amon, you're invited to deliver your
distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to address a few opening remarks at this webinar. COVID-19 and the Ombudsman is a very important topic, and I was pleased when our colleague, the State Ombudsman and State Controller of Israel, approached the IOI with the idea of organizing a webinar on this matter. Let me take the opportunity and express our thanks to Ombudsman Engelmann and his competent team for the exceptional work they have done in organizing this event. Your efforts are very much appreciated. Thank you very much. The pandemic hit us more or less unprepared. We suddenly had to deal with situations we have never experienced before, both in our environment but also in our private lives. Governments declared state of emergency to prevent the spread of the disease, and these lockdowns had huge impacts on our economies, with unemployment rates rising significantly. Private businesses and the public sector struggled to adapt and to maintain their services as effectively as possible. Health service personnel works around the clock and under tremendous strain to keep the system functioning and to ensure the best care for their patients. I could add many other things to this list of issues, but by now we are all more than aware of the problems we are facing due to the worldwide crisis. For the IOI, the International Ombudsman Institute, one of the most important objectives was to keep communication channels open with and among our members. One of the main benefits of being a member of the IOI is the continuous exchange of knowledge and experiences that we facilitate among our members. We usually do this by way of seminars, conferences, or workshops, That means by bringing colleagues together and enabling them to build stronger relations and networks with colleagues from ombudsman offices around the world. With the current situation, this active dialogue and discourse is all the more important. At the same time, our usual way of meeting has become impossible, and we don't know how long this situation will last. I'm therefore relieved to see that the current limitations have not hindered us from staying in touch, and that we have found virtual ways to exchange our experiences and to learn from each other, such as this webinar today. I'm pleased to see that many organizations are embracing this method of exchange by electronic means. The Ombudsman community has once again proven and be very adaptable, and this is a very encouraging development. Colleagues and friends, we hold this webinar today to speak about the different challenges our offices faced in light of COVID pandemic and how we deal with them in our everyday work. We would like to take this opportunity and give you a brief picture of our work here in Austria. As everybody else, we have made all efforts possible to ensure that we can continue providing our services to the citizens in the most effective way possible in this crisis. Our first and foremost goal was to make sure that our services remain accessible and that people can reach out to us with their concerns and complaints. And second, that the public is informed about the developments and about the rights they had during the never experienced situation of a lockdown. The Austrian Ombudsman Board has a weekly TV show on Austrian public television. This puts us in a very privileged position because we have the possibility to reach out to the public via this very effective and far-reaching medium. In March, the Austrian government declared the first lockdown, and many different measures came into effect, such as closing shops, closed schools, short-term working arrangement, face masks, restricted access to home for the elderly, and many more. It was then that my colleagues and I decided to give our weekly TV a specific coronavirus focus. We explained the necessity of the measures, and we answered the most pressing questions from citizens about issues such as closing hours and what people were allowed to do, social distancing and restrictions regarding the contact with others, travel restrictions or support payments from the fund for cases of exceptional hardship. This is actually an issue from my specific area of competence, and it was very unsettling to hear that citizens from other EU member states who could no longer travel to Austria to pursue their work in the nursing care for elderly did not receive payments from this fund simply because they don't have an Austrian bank account, a situation which is clearly in conflict with existing EU regulations, namely the so-called SEPA directive. Our work as national prevention mechanism is also very challenging at the moment. With this mandate, we monitor the situation of the most vulnerable in our society, such as older people, patients in psychiatric care, and detained persons in general. The usual on-site visits to facilities became almost important. And so, for instance, by falling back on more traditional means of communications, such as phone calls. Ladies and gentlemen, the time for this webinar is limited, and I don't want to take up too much of it. I'm looking forward to hearing the experiences from our members in the different regions and how you have tackled the new challenges we all face at the moment. Once again, I would like to thank our host, the Ombudsman of Israel, and his team for organizing this important event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Amon. We will now move on to the second and central part of the webinar, the lectures of the head of the Office of the Ombudsman of Israel and the presidents of the IOI regions. To open this set of lectures, I am proud to invite Dr. Esther Ben-Chaim, head of the Office of the Ombudsman of Israel, who will share with us how the Ombudsman Institution of Israel has been coping with the coronavirus crisis. Dr. Ben-Chaim.
Dear colleagues, hello and welcome to this important webinar. As we heard from previous speakers, even in regular times, the Ombudsman is alert to the difficulties of the individuals and gives them a voice. This task is even more urgent during times of emergency and crisis, since it is at these times that the individual is in the greatest need. In this lecture, I will share with you the ways the Ombudsman of Israel has been coping with the tremendous challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic. The COVID-19 crisis has left its mark on every country of the world. Let's take a look at what happened here in Israel. A glance at the timeline on this slide shows that only a few days after the World Health Organization declared the virus as a world pandemic, the Israeli government already imposed a series of restrictions on its residents and on visitors. The first lockdown was decreed in Israel about a fortnight later. The restrictions led to an almost complete shutdown of the economy for several weeks, except for places of work defined as essential. Hundreds of thousands of employees were sent on unpaid leave or dismissed from their places of work. Businesses closed down, and tens of thousands of people were quarantined. These measures had a drastic impact on wide segments of the population in many different ways. The extent of activity required of the public sector to alleviate the distress of the individual on the one hand, and the reduction of manpower and other restrictions on the other hand, led to complications and significant delays in the provisions of public services. Indeed, shortly after the outbreak of the crisis, we received the first wave of complaints. It should be pointed out that since the second lockdown, we are not seeing a similar peak in the number of complaints. This finding is encouraging since it indicates that public bodies have the ability to adapt themselves to emergency situations. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 crisis, we received over 11,000 letters of complaint. This is an increase of 21% compared with the equivalent period in 2019. About a quarter of the complaints were related directly to the coronavirus. Have women been more affected by the coronavirus crisis? In regular times, it is generally men who contact us, 60% men as opposed to 40% women. However, in this period, we see a reversal of the trend and there are more complaints by women. This reversal corresponds with the fact that the coronavirus crisis has affected women far more strongly than men. More women were sent on unpaid leave or dismissed as a result of the crisis. In addition, the salaries of women are traditionally lower than those of men, and lower salaried employees have been more affected by the crisis. Women, therefore, required greater assistance in the exercising of the rights. If we look at the bodies about the complaints which were filed, we can see the following trends. 67% of the letters of complaint relating to the coronavirus crisis were filed against the National Insurance Institute, the NII. Since this is a financial crisis, a significant amount of complaints concerned the social security support that the state provides to its citizens. 61% of those complaints against the NII were related to the unemployment benefits. We have made our priority to provide swift and effective assistance to complainants. As a result, since the outbreak of the coronavirus, we helped to resolve the problems of 71% of the complainants. As in regular times, we aim to give assistance to individuals in their dealings with public authorities. During the pandemic, especially, we took it upon ourselves to ensure that the war against COVID-19 did not cause public bodies to lose sight of the hardships of the individual. Let's take a look at those actions. The pandemic has posed a double challenge for us. First, since some of the staff were sent on compulsory vacation, manpower was drastically reduced. And secondly, the regional bureaus of the office were closed to the public. We acted with flexibility and creativity in order to address quickly and effectively the problems presented by the complainants, to provide swift assistance in the resolution of the problems. Due to the restriction posed by COVID-19, most of the complaints were filed by digital means. However, in cases where we felt that it was hard for the complainant to contact us by regular means or online, we facilitated other ways of contacting our office and permitted the filing of complaints by phone, despite the fact that the letter of the law provides that complaints must be filed in writing. Thus, we made our services accessible to all broad spectrum of the public. In addition, the coronavirus crisis posed many difficulties for people who do not speak Hebrew. In order to address this problem, we made sure that members of our staff who speak different languages are available on call to provide continuous assistance to this community. Our employees have also appeared in media that serves particular ethnic groups in order to reach out to those groups that encounter difficulties in their dealings with the authorities because of language barriers. For example, we were interviewed on radio station for Russian and Arabic speakers, which proved to be very effective. As Mr. Amon pointed out, the media is a crucial tool for both disseminating helpful information to the public and for voicing the hardships of the most vulnerable. In order to handle the complaints swiftly, without disrupting the heavy workload of the relevant public bodies, we conducted an ongoing discourse with these bodies. Together, we built unique schemes for complaints investigation. For example, we had daily phone contact with the public bodies, and in this way, significantly shortened the investigation process. At the same time, we continue to make use of our various investigation tools, such as the undercover client method. For example, our staff member anonymously phoned the call center of the Ministry of Health following a large number of complaints of citizens who had unsuccessfully tried contacting the center on coronavirus issues. We reflected the results of our investigation to the Ministry of Health so that they may improve this service. We also contacted some 50 social organizations that help people exercise their rights and offer them our services. And indeed, we have received complaints via social organizations. As Mr. Amon stated, we also recognize the importance and benefit of learning from ombuds institutions around the world, especially at a time when all the institutions are tackling similar challenges. We have therefore been closely following the actions taken by our colleagues in the international ombudsman community, and we have also shared our experiences with them. As we heard from the Ombudsman of Israel, Mr. Engelman, the State of Israel is the only country in the world in which the state comptroller is also the ombudsman. Throughout this coronavirus crisis, we shared with State Audit the vast amount of valuable information that it has accumulated. This information has served State Audit in the preparation of reports. The office has also adopted a policy of staff mobility, transferring its staff members from one department to the other when required. The Ombudsman of Israel filed a special report on the investigation of complaints during the first wave of the coronavirus. The report served a dual purpose: to inform the public as to the nature of the complaints and how they were handled, and also to reflect to the public bodies the performance in real time. Furthermore, following the special report, discussions were held in the Knesset, the Parliament of Israel. We also hosted a national webinar on ways of coping with the coronavirus for the benefit of Ombudsperson and other complaint investigation professionals in the public sector. We consider it our task to show these bodies how we are coping with the crisis and provide them with tools for use in their own organizations. Although we focus on resolving the problem of the specific complainant, when we identify a systemic defect, we disclose this to the public body concerned and monitor the rectification of the defect. I would now like to share with you 2 examples. We received a complaint from a man who resigned from his job because he lives with his elderly mother and was worried about infecting her with the virus. At first, the NII informed him that his resignation was not considered a dismissal and that therefore he was not entitled immediately to an unemployment benefits. However, following our intervention, the NII re-examined the matter and decided that the complainant, as well as many other people in the same situation, will be eligible for unemployment from the day they stopped working. Here is another example. The computer system of the tax authority required an Israeli ID number in order to file a claim for a grant offered to businesses that suffered as a result of the crisis. However, residents who are not citizens and do not hold an ID number were unable to file a claim. Due to our investigation, the tax authority issued special ID numbers which enabled the filing of the claim in such cases. The COVID-19 crisis is still not over, and today we are tackling with the consequences of the second wave of the pandemic. However, the period that has elapsed since the outbreak of the crisis allows us to take a moment's respite and formulate the insights gained from it. So what has the coronavirus crisis taught us? It has taught us the importance of strengthening the public complaints commissioners in the different public bodies. The complaints commissioners are at the forefront and have the ability to incorporate within the public bodies the norms of effective and high-quality public service. The crisis must serve as an opportunity for examining ways of improving the efficacy of work processes and the provision of services, improving and at the same time simplifying. The crisis has also emphasized the need to pay attention to vulnerable population, most certainly in ordinary times, but even more so in times of crisis, as Mr. Tyndall also mentioned. The strengthening of cooperation between the different bodies is of great importance. We have often found ourselves actually linking up 2 bodies in order to resolve an issue raised in a complaint that relates to both bodies and requires each one to contribute to a resolution. We believe that the bodies themselves can connect up with each other. During the crisis, we have adopted a more flexible and creative approach to the way we perform our function. I believe other bodies should adopt a similar approach in order to improve public service. To sum up, necessity is the mother of invention. The world crisis has brought to the fore our collective ability to innovate as we have risen to the challenges and continued to be accessible and provide improved service to the public. It is my hope that even after the crisis subsides and life returns to normal, we will continue to take advantage of the lessons learned from these challenging times and provide ever-improving service to the public. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ben-Chaim. And now, let's hear the lectures of the regional presidents. We will start with the lecture of Ms. Caroline Sacconi, President of the IOI African Region and Public Protector of Zambia. Ms. Sacconi, you're invited to make your address.
Thank you. It is an honor for me to join other IOI regional presidents to talk to you on this international webinar organized by the IOI and the Office of the State Controller and Ombudsman of Israel. May I begin by condoling with the families of the over 500,000 people who have died of COVID-19 and related complications the world over. It has been a tragedy of immense proportion. May we, especially as ombudsmen, assist to make the world a better place by encouraging people to respect our environment more, so that a similar tragedy may at best never reoccur, and at the worst, that we may never lose so many lives due to a pandemic or epidemic again, such that those who have died as a result of COVID-19 infections will not have died in vain. The concept of being a global village has now been indelibly written into world history like at no time before. The pandemic has spread its tentacles throughout the world at a rapid pace, followed closely on by ailing economies as a trickle-down effect of the reach of COVID-19 worldwide. No continent has been left untouched or unaffected. The topic for this webinar, COVID-19 and the Ombudsperson, Rising to the Challenge of the Pandemic, could not have come at a better time than this, when Ombudsman institutions are needed more than ever to ensure that our people continue to access public services, even at the peak of the pandemic, and to provide the much required checks and balances in the public service delivery system as we navigate under the new normal. COVID-19 has presented ombudsman institutions with major challenges in ensuring that the institutions continues to serve even the most vulnerable in society, who might not have access to ICT facilities, which have taken over communications and the fabric of life today as we know it. Ombudsman institutions now more than ever need to rise to the occasion and ensure that people and governments do not take advantage of the pandemic and manipulate the systems for their personal gains. With economies shrinking, the priority of any government is to decrease funding to perceived non-essential areas of government in order to reroute funding to the health sector and effectively curtail the spread of COVID-19. Governance institutions, such as the Office of the Ombudsman, have not been excluded from the austerity measures that have been implemented. In a lot of instances, government institutions are weakly supported already. Thus, the role of the Ombudsman is from the first instance minimized without the realization that it is the main oversight institution and the first line of defense for ordinary citizens when their rights are breached. The need to learn from the COVID-19 experience is cardinal. A health crisis can run so deep that it is necessary to interfere with the enjoyment of basic human rights and freedoms. In enforcing the reduction of the enjoyment of certain rights by the citizen, government must be monitored. The most effective monitoring mechanism is the Office of the Ombudsman. The office has unfettered access to government whilst carrying out its inquiries. It must not be hindered in carrying out its inquiries by issues of reduced funding. It is an essential office at all times, but more so in times of crisis. When government services cannot be freely accessed and the quality of their service has been compromised due to emergency measures, then the role of the Ombudsman must not be minimized. Restricted access to essential government services is a matter which gives rise to the need for readily available and accessible administrative justice services as a matter of priority. For ombudsman offices in Africa, The lockdown has affected them. A lot of ombudsman officers had locked down. The ombudsman office in Zambia had not locked down and completely. Like hospital workers, we believe that ombudsman services are an essential service. In Zambia, the first case was detected in March 2020. The government of Zambia responded swiftly to the pandemic by closing down schools, bars, and they banned all public gatherings. A multi-sectoral team was quickly put in place to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Arising from this, the government immediately tasked the Minister of Health to coordinate and give guidance to the nation through daily briefings.
Thank you
The main legal instrument, thank you. I'm still proceeding.
I'm sorry, you can go on, please.
Thank you. The main legal instrument in line with any health pandemic in Zambia is the Public Health Act, and it was this act which set the tone for the COVID-19 regulation. Other measures taken included restrictions on movement of people, mandatory wearing of masks in public places, and the prohibition of gatherings of more than 50 people. The response of the Ombudsman. The response of the Ombudsman during this time was that we have carried out a study on government to ensure that the funding to the health sector is being properly used, and that the government is being accountable to the public. Even though the office equally imposed restrictions in terms of access to its premises, it continued to serve the aggrieved members of the public through the above mentioned platforms. Importantly, though, the Office of the Public Protector never completely closed its doors to direct engagement with members of the public. The office was kept open throughout, managed by a skeletal staff serving on a rotational basis. Currently, as I stated, the office has commenced an own-initiative investigation to ascertain whether the government agencies tasked with the responsibility of coordinating the receipt and distribution of COVID-19 financial and other materials are adhering to the laid down procedures. Through this own initiative, the Ombudsman will also ascertain the working conditions for the frontline workers and further visits vulnerable institutions like mental institutions, old people's homes, and orphanages in order to gauge the impact of the pandemic to these people, then recommend to government the appropriate strategies to cushion them. Like other continents the world over, Africa has not been spared by the coronavirus disease. Initial incidents of the coronavirus in Africa were first reported in North Africa. The disease then spread to the countries in the sub-Saharan region. Many experts, including the World Health Organization, were of the opinion that Africa was going to be the hardest hit continent, largely due to the fact that Africa has one of the weakest health infrastructures, coupled with low budgets on healthcare than any other continent. The economic impact, however, has been the hardest on Africa. Adverse economic impacts in Africa are largely a consequence of the preventive measures adopted by the respective governments to curtail the spread of the disease. Key measures adopted by most countries to curtail the spread include the closing of their frontiers and partial or complete lockdowns of economies, which, among other things, have seen the temporary closure of businesses, schools, and social services. However, the limiting of rights and freedoms is a case in point here again as a tool for the effective capping of the spread of the disease. Communication has been key in ensuring that services are reaching as many people as possible in spite of COVID-19. The Kenya Office of the Ombudsman scaled down operations and encouraged the public to reach the office via ICT facilities, as did Ethiopia, South Africa, Nigeria, and many other ombudsman institutions across the continent. It must be noted, however, that it was particularly difficult for vulnerable people in Africa who do not have access to the internet. Africa has related the COVID pandemic in much the same way as it has had to relate to other outbreaks in recent history. The isolation of affected areas and the imposition of social and cultural restrictions, as well as the diversion of material and financial resources to affected areas, has been common practice. It must be noted that the curtailing of personal freedoms, again, I reiterate, is a tool of health management and disease control in almost all countries worldwide. The ripple effects of the pandemic have impacted continents proportionately. The Ombudsman Office has the responsibility of policing maladministration, especially when these basic rights and freedoms are withdrawn in the public interest for the protection of the general populace. The Office of the Ombudsman in Africa is present in over 40 countries out of a total number of 54 countries on the continent. This is to say that at least 75% of the people in Africa have the right of access to an Office of the Ombudsman, although I'm not saying that for certain 75% of the people in Africa are able to access the services of an ombudsman. Colleagues, rising to the challenge for the Ombudsman institution is not only ensuring that our staff and communities are safe, but also finding local ways and solutions to deliver on our mandate of enhancing accountability in public administration and the rule of law. Despite the pandemic affecting our operations, Ombudsman institutions need to ensure that they are client-centered by being accessible and helping to create a better society for ordinary members of the society. Governments are urged to ensure that they give sufficient support to the role of the Ombudsman in its primary role of protecting its citizens' rights, pursuing the public good, and ensuring that public officers are made more accountable. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sacconi. I would now like to invite Mr. Paul Dubé, President of the IOI North American Region and Ombudsman of Ontario, Canada, to deliver his lecture. Good morning to you, Mr. Dubé.
Good morning to you. Good morning to all of you. Dear colleagues, chers collègues, bonne journée. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be. My name is Paul Dubé. I'm the Ombudsman for the province of Ontario, and I'm speaking to you from Toronto, Canada today. It is really a pleasure to be with you today to discuss how we as Ombudsman practitioners around the world have been facing the significant challenges posed by the global COVID-19 pandemic. And it's a particular pleasure to see and hear so many of my esteemed colleagues and friends, even though it's virtually. As an Ombudsman, I am extremely grateful to be part of the IOI, the Global Organization for Ombudsmen, so that we can share our experiences during this pandemic, as well as our strategies for ensuring that we remain accessible and impactful in our work. Sharing best practices and facing these challenges in solidarity will enhance our ability to provide the maximum benefits for the citizens and the institutions that we all serve. Today, I will share with you experiences in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic here in Ontario and across Canada, as well as North America. Some details on how we have been dealing with this crisis, which, as we know, is not just a health crisis, but an economic and social crisis as well. As far as the Ontario experience is concerned, on March 16th, 2020, the Ontario government declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic and directed all non-essential public servants to work from home. All non-essential businesses were ordered closed, and public health officials called on everyone to stay home to minimize the spread of the novel coronavirus. We closed our doors that day and implemented a remote work protocol. As I noted when I released my annual report in June of 2020, the importance of government and the vital work of the public service take on an even greater significance during a crisis, and that has really been made evident during this pandemic. While Ontario's public service responded admirably to the crisis on so many fronts, there were bound to be gaps and needs left unaddressed due to the sheer scale of the pandemic and the speed with which plans had to be developed and put into motion. So our oversight and surveillance role and the ability to provide valuable feedback therefore became more crucial than ever. Being accessible to the most vulnerable citizens was a prime concern, and considerable time and energy was spent on ensuring that inmates in correctional facilities and children and youth in care, in addition to the general population, were able to contact us. Residents of long-term care homes have made up 81% of the reported COVID-19 deaths across Canada, and more than 70% in Ontario. Of the 3,127 deaths related to COVID-19 in Ontario, 2,004 of those deaths were residents of long-term care homes. While I do not have jurisdiction over the operation of long-term care homes and hospitals, which are the purview of the patient ombudsman, the Ministries of Health and the Ministry of Long-Term Care are within my remit. So on June 1st, 2020, my team and I launched an investigation into the oversight of long-term care homes by the province's Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and the Ministry of Long-Term Care and the Ministry of Health during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The investigation is focusing on whether the oversight of long-term care homes by those ministries during the coronavirus crisis has been adequate to ensure the safety of residents and staff. As of October 16th, 2020, 7 months after our office closing, our staff have received and responded to 9,463 complaints in the Ombudsman's General Unit, with an additional 123 in the French Language Services Unit and 534 complaints in the Child and Youth Unit. As for COVID-19 specific complaints, from March 16th to October 16th, Ombudsman staff have received and responded to 1,518 complaints relating specifically to the issues surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of these complaints have been from people who are worried about the effect of the state of emergency on public services, or who could not reach government officials. Thanks to our long track record of working collaboratively and proactively with public sector bodies, our staff were well positioned to provide helpful information or to connect people with the right officials. We dealt with school board complaints, the issues like returning to class, the timing of returning to class, the availability of personal protective equipment, class sizes and physical distancing, the quality of remote and online learning, the issue of dissolving virtual schools, hybrid models, that type of thing. We got complaints about the Ministry of the Solicitor General, which oversees correctional facilities. The fear of virus transmission within correctional facilities was quite considerable. The inability to practice social distancing on ranges within correctional facilities. Inmates being told to clean the cells of those who tested positive for COVID. Allegations of inmates being improperly put into isolation. Those are some of the issues we've dealt with. In terms of municipalities, which we also oversee, we heard complaints about mask bylaws and public participation in municipal meetings. As for the Ontario government in general, provincial government's pandemic response, including insufficient support for parents whose children are participating in e-learning, was an example of the complaints we received. The Ministry of the Attorney General, we received complaints about tribunals, those continue to be the primary complaint with respect to the Attorney General. The impact of the pandemic on landlord and tenant board delays and the decisions to pause eviction proceedings. We've received complaints about difficulty in accessing COVID emergency benefits through Ontario Disability Support Program, complaints from parents who have concerns with their children's residential placements. In terms of other provinces in Canada, according to a meeting of Canada's provincial and territorial ombudsmen that we held on October 14th, 2020, The experiences of ombudsman offices across Canada have varied greatly according to the population density and the rates of infection. For example, in the Yukon Territory, there was only one active case of COVID-19 due to border restrictions at that time. 60% of government staff remained at work. In the Northwest Territories, there had been no cases since April and no community spread. Most COVID complaints had been about border restrictions. In Newfoundland and Labrador, there were only 4 cases provincially and none in long-term care home. All of the Ombudsman's employees were back to work. In Nova Scotia, 50% of the Ombudsman's staff work remotely and 53 cases of COVID-19 were reported in long-term care. In New Brunswick, there were very few cases until a doctor returned from travel and caused an outbreak. Learning lessons from Belgium, long-term care homes in New Brunswick acted quickly to protect residents and cases were minimal. In Manitoba, the Ombudsman operates 3 offices. Maintaining phone access was a challenge with staff working remotely. And as I write this, Manitoba is reacting to a new wave of cases and imposing new restrictions on businesses and public activities. In Alberta, 30% of the staff in the office are on a rotational basis, and each team is in the office every 3 weeks. So that's an overview from North America. I want to thank you for your attention and the opportunity to share this information. Au plaisir de se revoir en personne. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. Dubé. I wish now to invite Mr. Rafael Ribó, President of the IOI European Region and Ombudsman of Catalonia, Spain, to deliver his lecture. Mr. Ribó, you are invited to take the floor. Can you unmute, please, Mr. Ribó? Unmute. Unmute, please.
Now it's okay?
Yes, it's okay. It's okay, yes. Okay.
Yut tobale hulam, ubahot la esma. I am trying to say in Hebrew, congratulations, thank you very much, good health for everybody, and go ahead with this initiative.
So much, Mr. Ribó.
So, we are here in front of a sudden appeared crisis, COVID-19, and to face COVID challenges today and Ombudsman challenges. Today, the European map of the COVID is all in red except Norway, Finland, Turkey, and Greece, meaning that we are all over more than 1,000 index of cases. And Ombudsman challenges, we think from Europe, could be classified in 2 special items. How do we face the health and social crisis with our tools for best practices and human rights protection? And how do we face the crisis in our own institutions with our personnel, staff, means, and competence? I won't present you what happens in my institution. I am trying to give you an overview, reminding all of you that we had already good discussions, for example, in the 25th years of the European Ombudsman agenda, talking about the impact of COVID among European network members, or what the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman of the UK work and published after a questionnaire circulating among all of us, the Ombudsman Coronavirus and Crisis Management Interim Report, October 2020. What the Council of Europe different bodies are telling us. For example, the Venice Commission on their report on elections in COVID-19, or what the European Commissioner of Human Rights, Ms. Mijatovic, is telling us about prisons and prisoners in pandemic time, or what many of our colleagues are publishing a list of special reports, like the last one I got from Cyprus, from quarantine ordinances. I am sure we all concentrate our efforts in front of the effects on vulnerable population, and how do we adapt our role to work with them? Like how it's changing the sense of children's rights when we see a general lockdown at home, or the increase of domestic violence, or the same thing in parallel with women and gender equality. Or how do we have to challenge our classical values on elder people, and especially of nursery homes models? For example, when we are getting complaints from visits from relatives, even before death process, social transference, poverty and different dimensions, homelessness and different public policies we are developing, or what does it mean today, the COVID crisis in front of energy poverty and basic supplies demands, disabilities of all types, or what happens when this big economic crisis is making to emerge a lot of migrants that were working in our countries in illegal situation, and now they are in front of no help at all. More in danger even the refugees in our camps, either in Greece with our Greek colleague reporting, or now in Spain, the Canary Islands, or the crisis of the inmates and families under quarantine. In general, all types of social and economic life crisis, economic recovery demands, or the big discover that this crisis brought us some good surprises in environmental air pollution improves. How do we could maintain those indexes, or the danger of attending lockdowns in cultural activities without taking care that culture is one of the main tools in front of those crises. I would underline especially what happens in basic human rights. For example, in access to any public information, or either in access to information that we should give from our institutions, that maybe we take longer and that we have difficulties for giving paper documents in the middle of the crisis. Or of course, maintaining the data protection GDPR status. Or in what some of our countries, it's quoted as a state of alarm. How do we cope with answers to freedom of expression demands, of demonstration rights demands? How do we cope curfew provisions, police powers and mobility restrictions, or impose it in not an appropriate way, sanctions in front of people that want to express their own demands? Let me go for a second to this crisis in front of our institutions. All of us, we had to manage to provide safety and well-being of all our colleagues, but while maintaining our institutions open and accessible. I know many of us had to physically close our buildings for government provisions. We did that during several weeks. Then we reopened that and we continue working in remote manners that we were not used to that through electronic means. Using all type of tools. For example, this crisis is presenting us the big advantages of own initiative competence. But some of us, they don't have the provision to use this tool. Or when we had to pause our work during some weeks, or when we were to make our efforts trying to save more pressure on overloaded health and social services that had to be the receivers of our recommendations. This represented a big impact on the workload of our staffs. And we could recommend all of us to survey and approaching our staff to cope with new type of complaints, to develop new training challenges, and especially to take the lessons on what to do, what we can learn from the return, I would say to maybe a false return to normal periods. It's absolutely uncertain that could happen. Nobody dares to predict. They are talking about a third wave. They are talking about winter coming and how do we base in a consolidated way winter cues. But anyhow, we Ombudsman, we are a special institution that after the principles of Venice help us to maintain a big and a strong position. We cannot go backwards and be present in this special and so important battle for the welfare of everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ribot. And now, I'm happy to invite Ms. Victoria Pearman, President of the IOI Caribbean and Latin America region and Ombudsman of Bermuda, to share with us her experiences and insights. Ms. Pearman, you're invited to take the floor.
Good day, colleagues. I'm so pleased to be here with you today, and I would certainly like to thank the organizers for this important effort. When I was preparing my brief remarks, and I understand I have 7 minutes, so that's going to be a challenge for me. But when I was preparing my remarks, I thought that we could use some good news. I thought that it would be beneficial if we concentrated on the uniqueness of our institution and why it helps us to rise to the challenge. Having said that, already today, I've encountered all sorts of challenges that are connected with COVID.
Ms. Pearman, we can't hear you right now. We're trying to reconnect. We'll give it just a few more seconds. Okay. I would like now to invite Mr. Peter Boucher, President of the IOI Australasian and Pacific region and Chief Ombudsman of New Zealand, to make his address.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Warm greetings to you all. Unfortunately, for the past year, we've all needed to deal with a global pandemic. There's been no time more important than now for ombudsmen to speak truth to power. And I believe that as a region, we've done this. We are a diverse region, with Taiwan being our northernmost point and New Zealand at the most southern. Our approach to the pandemic varied. How each of us spoke truth also depended on other challenges our nation or state was facing. These included bushfires in Australia, Cyclone Harold in Vanuatu, Tonga and Solomon Islands, and protests in Hong Kong. But we all shared the desire to ensure that human rights were not adversely impacted by government measures to manage the pandemic. In many parts of the region, borders were closed, people were being placed in isolation or quarantine, large gatherings were banned, and visitors to places of detention were not allowed. States of emergency or lockdowns operated in New Zealand, Samoa, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, and the Cook Islands, for example. The state now has so much say in people's everyday lives. Across the region, many offices were closed and staff worked from home. Through Zoom and email, we kept in contact, supporting each other by sharing information and insights. Demand for our services varied. Hong Kong experienced close to a 300% increase in complaints this year, with 15,000 relating to social issues and COVID. Australia's taxation ombudsman received 240 COVID-related contacts, and my office received around 500. Reduced working hours in Taiwan are contributing to increased contacts about social, security and mental health issues. In almost all places we maintained service levels. And what did we do? Talked to key agencies early and often. In Vanuatu, meetings were held with the Police and Attorney General on how to better enforce regulations under a state of emergency. In Papua New Guinea and here in New Zealand, we met with essential frontline services and key agencies to help them prepare for extra information requests. Western Australia and New Zealand produced COVID-specific guidance materials for agencies. In Tonga, they went directly to the people using traditional and social media. Some were directly involved in pandemic response. In the Northern Territory, for example, the Ombudsman had oversight of enforcement of its emergency provisions and quarantine requirements. Unfortunately for some, the pandemic recovery cost has meant budget cuts. The Cook Islands and the Solomon Islands have had to reduce services. Some work has been postponed to avoid putting too much pressure on agencies at this time. The region has been actively monitoring human rights during the pandemic. The Commonwealth Ombudsman's in-person inspections of the federal government's immigration detention facilities were suspended. They have since resumed, focusing on COVID risk management. Even though OPCAT has yet to be implemented in Victoria, an investigation into the treatment of people detained under an emergency health directive is now underway. In Taiwan, the Control Yuan saw an alarming rise in domestic violence and sexual assault, strengthening its commitment to protecting Taiwanese women's rights. In New Zealand, my designation as an essential service during the pandemic required me to reset my OPCAT inspection program. I was determined to conduct on-site inspections, but there was pushback from some quarters. But we got there, following a lot of letters and phone calls with everyone from the Prime Minister down. Over 3 months, my team inspected 25 detention facilities. Last month, I started inspecting isolation and quarantine facilities. I've also been working with other agencies on a report about the treatment of disabled people during the pandemic. It's always difficult to summarise the extensive amount and range of work we do in this region. And the initial months of this pandemic presented us with unprecedented challenges. But I believe we have overcome these and have been able to hold our governments to account. E noho rā.
Thank you, Mr. Bosher. Unfortunately, we cannot reconnect with Ms. Pierman, so we will conclude this part of the webinar, and I am happy to invite Mr. Vidavat Rajatanun, Treasurer of the IOI Asian Region and Chief Ombudsman of Thailand, to deliver his lecture.
Hello colleagues, distinguished delegates and all respective audiences. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of the international webinar on the theme of COVID-19 and the Ombudsman rising to the challenge of a pandemic. I would like to highlight our experiences in Thailand in the context of the current worldwide crisis. Complaints relate to the COVID-19 pandemic. Firstly, due to the impact of pandemic since February to March 2020 this year, Thailand has shown promising progress in combating the virus, which is underlined by the relatively low number of cases and mortalities. Ombudsman Thailand has seen an increase in complaints from people in various issues, especially in the domain of public health, especially shortage of medical masks and hand sanitizers. In March 2020, complaints were lodged with the Ombudsman by members of the public and medical professionals regarding the scarcity of such items, due to soaring demands during the pandemic with unreasonably high selling prices both in Bangkok and other provinces. Ombudsman Thailand conducted a fact-finding investigation in this matter and consulted with the relative state agencies, which led to the recommendations. Recommendations on the shortage of medical masks and hand sanitizers. Ombudsman proposed the Commission on the consideration of exports under the Center for COVID-19 Situation Administration to come up with measures to restrict the export of medical masks and requested measures to distribute a licensed medical mask which has been produced to dispatch for foreign markets for the domestic distribution instead. Proposing the Ministry of Commerce to closely monitor the condition of supplies for the production of medical masks and hand sanitizers to prevent any future shortage. Proposing the Excise Department to exempt tax for the processing of liquor with 80% or more alcohol content to make hand sanitizers to facilitate a capacity increase in production of hand sanitizers amid the epidemic of COVID-19. The second complaint, after the case of the foreign nationals' arrival were permitted to enter Thailand in Rayong province, where is the important industrial estate, without enforced quarantine under a special arrangement with a foreign country or VIP case, it raises a high concern of infections to all people and made people anxious. Thus, the Ombudsman consulted with the relevant state agencies and proposed the following recommendations. The recommendations on state quarantine measures. Ombudsman Thailand had submitted a recommendation for the Center for COVID-19 Situation Administration to monitor and follow up the situation of foreign VIP arrival to minimize the risk of infections. A special arrangement for foreign VIP arrival should be cancelled. All foreign must get swab testing for COVID-19. The relevant state agencies should also decrease the cost of alternative state quarantine for foreign workers in a reasonable price. The third complaint, following the Thai government's recent financial relief scheme called เราไม่ทิ้งกัน which means we won't leave anyone behind, which introduced 5,000 baht cash handout to Thai citizens who have lost their jobs or income due to lockdown measures, and those who have been affected by the closure of businesses in order to ease the impact of COVID-19. The Ombudsman received the complaints that the project's analytical mechanism and artificial intelligence or AI responsible in compiling and accessing personal data did not work properly. This resulted in people being filtered out from the system and not receiving the cash handout in the end. Therefore, the Ombudsman consulted with relevant state agencies, proposed the following recommendations. Recommendations on the Thai government's financial relief scheme. Firstly, proactively follow up on those left out by the scheme who is eligible for this package or not, to receive due support from the state. Secondly, setting up technician team to figure out for those who have trouble on accessing to the online platform system. In conclusion, these are strategy and recommendations in the previous and determine what actions and next steps we should take from Ombudsman Thailand to tackling COVID-19 situation. Last but not least, I would like to take this opportunity to express my thanks to you all and sincerely hope that you and your staff and their family remain safe and healthy at this difficult and unpredictable time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rajatanun. Before we move on from continents to countries, I'm honored to invite Mr. Gianni Buchicchio, President of the European Commission for Democracy Through Law, also known as the Venice Commission, to make his address. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Buchicchio. Mr. Buchicchio, can you unmute, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank both of you, Mr. Engelmann and Mrs. Ben Naim, for your kind invitation to address a few words on behalf of the Venice Commission today. I would also like to recall that Israel has been a member of the Venice Commission since 2008. Now, I will present you in a nutshell the main works of which the Venice Commission has undertaken with regard to the COVID-19 context. National governments have taken exceptional measures in order to handle the pandemic and slow down the spread of the virus. Emergency measures have affected the normal functioning of state institutions and the democratic process, and have also introduced additional and extraordinary limitations on fundamental rights and freedoms. In the past 3 decades, the Venice Commission has examined the constitutional and legal framework of emergency powers in many countries. It has also issued a rule of law checklist which elaborates specific benchmarks for the exceptions to the principle of legality in emergency situations. Since almost all countries have been called on to take urgent and decisive action, the Venice Commission decided to offer additional legal guidance on the issues at stake. In March 2020, we gathered all our past documents and updated them. In April, our scientific council summarized relevant general reports and country-specific opinions in a compilation on constitutional provisions and legislation on emergency situations. This compilation has further been completed by a report adopted last June, setting out our reflections on the respect for democracy, human rights, and rule of law during states of emergency. This report is based on the observation of current situations, but may apply mutatis mutandis to any emergency context. The report duly refers to the Ombudsperson's institution and to its mission to promote and protect human rights, highlighting the importance of human rights in the context of emergency situations and helping citizens affected by the emergency measures. The important role of the Ombudsperson institutions as a useful complement to parliamentary and judicial control has been underscored. In July 2020, we also launched the Observatory of Situations of Emergency in the 62 Venice Commission member states. The aim of the observatory is to collect country-specific information on constitutional and extra-constitutional emergency powers, on relevant mechanisms of parliamentary and judicial oversight, and on electoral experiences. At the request of the President of the European Parliament, the Commission has adopted a report on the measures taken in the EU member states as a result of the COVID-19 crisis and their impact. Democracy also implies free and fair elections. Inevitably, in view of the duration of this pandemic, questions relating to the holding of elections have arisen. We organized last week a conference with the electoral management bodies of the member countries of the Commission, and more than 160 participants sought to find answers to the challenges that the pandemic has posed for the holding of democratic elections. Finally, dear Ombudspersons, allow me to conclude that the Venice Commission has always been convinced of the importance of your role in the democratic balance and for an effective protection of human rights in a country. And the current pandemic only reinforces this conviction. I would like to highlight in this regard that the principle for the protection and promotion of the Ombudsman institutions, the so-called Venice principles, to which Mr. Ribot made a reference, are also proving more valuable than ever in these difficult and special times. I would like to invite you to make full use of the Venice principles, but I would also like to confirm the indefectible presence of the Venice Commission at your side. The Commission is always ready to assist you. The promotion and protection of fundamental rights is what binds us in all circumstances more than ever before. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Buchicchio. Thank you for your important words, Mr. Buchicchio. We will now watch the recorded message of Mr. Andreas Potakis, President of the Association of Mediterranean Ombudsmen and Ombudsman of Greece.
Dear colleagues and dear friends, I'm delighted to be addressing, even via this pre-recorded video message, what is promising to be a very important and highly topical webinar organized by the State Controller and Ombudsman of Israel, Mr. Engelman. Indeed, the pandemic has had an impact on all of our offices, as well as our economies and our societies, and we have had to rise to the occasion in order to confront the challenges posed and offer the services that our citizens are in need. Keeping in mind, of course, that we have to make everything possible to ensure the safety of our staff and also the safety of the people that are addressing their complaints to us. Actually, I think that the pandemic has brought to the fore both new challenges and also pre-existing ones, albeit in a much more extreme way. And we have had, as ombudsman institutions, to address both of them. The Greek Ombudsman has adopted a multifaceted approach in order to address the challenges posed to both the Greek economy and the Greek society by the pandemic. We have done a series of recommendations addressed to both central and local authorities in order to raise awareness as to the measures that are in need to be adopted so as at least the most vulnerable groups among our population are protected. We have also made a series of interventions and we have mediated in a number of cases in order to ensure that the effects of the pandemic will not hit too hard our population. And I note that the pandemic sees no difference between different groups of populations. The social stratification of all society is affected by the pandemic. Although we all feel that we are going through a very difficult period, I fear that what is to come may be even more stark and bring about even more difficult challenges for our offices. The economy and society will be greatly affected by this prolonged period of measures adopted in order to reduce the spread, to restrict the spread of the pandemic. In fact, as I'm speaking to you via this pre-recorded video message, Greece has entered its second phase of a lockdown, and the ramifications on both the economy but as well as the society are yet to be fully estimated. With these few thoughts that I would like to share with you, I wish every success to my colleague, Mr. Engelman, and his team, his head of office, Ms. Ben-Haim. And I'm looking very much forward to attending and to following the workings of this, I repeat, extremely important and highly topical webinar. I wish you every success.
Thank you, Mr. Potakis. We would now like to share with you 6 of the pre-recorded video interventions that we received from you, 1 from each region. We would have liked to show you all the interventions that we received and hear the interesting contributions of our colleagues. However, as mentioned earlier, due to time limitations, we will not be at present be able to show them all, and for this we apologize. However, we will make sure to send you all the interventions after the webinar. So, let's make our way to South Africa and hear from the Public Protector of South Africa how the pandemic has affected the office's work and which steps the office has taken to ensure the continuity of work.
Greetings from South Africa. It is a privilege to share my office's experience in dealing with the challenge brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. The government imposed a national lockdown in April 2020, severely restricting people's free movement, and those restrictions were deemed critical as we were determined to keep the infection rate as low as possible to save lives. The whole COVID-19 experience seriously affected our work as the Office of the Public Protector. Subjects of investigations were not responsive as government offices were closed. We could also no longer go into far-flung communities to conduct our public education program and provide the mobile office service. In addition, we had to close all our 18 walk-in offices to protect both our staff and the public. We had to find new ways of being as effective and efficient as we had been prior to the pandemic. Staff had to work remotely, but many of them did not have the tools of trade to do so. We had to spend up to 4.7 million rands or $289,000 to acquire these equipments. Investigations had to be conducted virtually, and for the accessibility of our offices, we had to rely on radio and social media. All complaints had to be lodged through an email. As the government began to gradually open or resume operations, we had few staff in our offices. This came with its own challenges. We had to procure protective personal equipment for staff and enforce stringent safety measures in the offices. Despite this, positive cases of COVID-19 would be reported internally now and again. Whenever this happened, we would close the affected offices with immediate effect for disinfection of those offices. But the impact was no longer that dire, as the workforce now had tools to work from home, and there was business continuity and less disruption of operations. The government has lifted restrictions and we are operating full-time or in full capacity in all our offices. In a nutshell, the advent of COVID-19 has forced us to do work differently. Thank you.
Now, we will hear from the Human Rights Ombudsman of Guatemala and president of the Ibero-American Ombudsman Federation, how his institute has been tackling the impact of the pandemic in the areas of health services, education, access to drinking water, nutrition, and others.
Mucho gusto, mi nombre es Jordán Rodas Andrade, Procurador de los Derechos Humanos de Guatemala y actualmente presidente de la Federación Iberoamericana de Ombudsman, la FIO. Quiero compartirles mi experiencia durante la pandemia COVID-19. La Constitución Política de la República me da el mandato de promover y defender los derechos humanos en Guatemala y también de supervisar la administración pública. Y en ese sentido quiero decirles que hemos supervisado la red hospitalaria nacional, pudiendo percatarnos que lamentablemente ha sido olvidada por décadas, especialmente los primeros niveles de salud, los puestos y centros de salud, los más cercanos a la población, y los hospitales no han sido suficientemente abastecidos. He tenido que llegar al punto de judicializar el derecho a la salud para obligar al gobierno a comprar el equipo de protección personal tan necesario en esta época de pandemia. Es importante resaltar que un sector olvidado permanentemente son los privados de libertad, porque no tenían un protocolo de protección por el COVID-19. Planteé otra acción de amparo y así también recurrí para obligar al gobierno a masificar las pruebas, porque a más pruebas puede tener un diagnóstico de la realidad de cómo estábamos y cómo estamos hoy día en esta época del COVID-19. Hay que reconocer que Guatemala es un país multicultural, lo que significa que tenemos que ser sensibles y dotar de la información necesaria también en los distintos idiomas mayas que se hablan en Guatemala. Se recomienda mucho el lavarse permanentemente las manos con agua y con jabón. El vital líquido es un derecho humano, pero hay muchas partes del país, incluso la ciudad capital, donde el agua no llega a las casas, razón por la cual también he tenido que plantear amparos teniendo respuesta favorable de los tribunales competentes. Y me preocupa mucho la desnutrición. Ya de por sí Guatemala es uno de los países con más desnutrición crónica, ya que 1 de cada 2 niños menores de 5 años sufre ese flagelo de la desnutrición crónica. El derecho a la educación también fue una situación delicada en esta época, ya que muchos pensaron que teníamos todas las mismas condiciones en la ciudad capital que en los departamentos, y no es así. No en todos los departamentos y municipios se cuenta con un internet, con energía eléctrica de calidad para que los niños pudieran acceder y los jóvenes al derecho a la educación. Como presidente de la FIO, la Federación Iberoamericana de Ombudsman, tuvimos un acercamiento con Michelle Bachelet, la alta comisionada para los derechos humanos de Naciones Unidas, para intercambiar experiencias, porque todos los países tenemos un problema común que es que el COVID, pero hemos aprendido entre nosotros al abordaje de cómo podemos entre todos salir adelante de esta época que nos enseña una lección. Tenemos que estar conscientes de que la tecnología es una herramienta vital para salir de esta crisis hoy día que estamos pasando. Muchas gracias.
Next, let us welcome the video clip intervention of the Human Rights Ombudsman of Slovenia. In this video clip, we will hear about a special webpage established by the Ombudsman, giving information about the measures taken by the government to deal with COVID-19, as well as about recommendations made by the Slovenian Ombudsman to the government regarding the rights of vulnerable people.
Dear all, greetings from the Human Rights Ombudsman of the Republic of Slovenia, and indeed from myself. As the distance between my colleague who is filming and myself is appropriate, I will speak without a face mask. Needless to say, the Human Rights Ombudsman of the Republic of Slovenia has been closely monitoring the measures adopted by state authorities in Slovenia in order to contain the COVID-19 epidemic from the beginning of this health crisis. In general, we have acknowledged that specific measures had been needed in order to prevent epidemic, but we have promoted a human rights-based approach, individual responsibility, and the need to pay special attention to most vulnerable groups. The restrictions of human rights and fundamental freedoms are acceptable and legitimate only if they are proportional, not discriminatory, time-limited, clear, transparent, and based on the law and professional recommendations. By the 1st of October 2020, we have dealt with more than 1,000 COVID-19 related cases. Most of these cases are related to the social security rights such as healthcare and institutional care, equality and protection against discrimination, the protection of dignity, personal rights, safety and privacy, restriction of professional liberties and children's rights, and the right to education. Further, we made numerous public statements, calls, media interviews, social media appearances, and established a web subpage on the COVID-19 measures and human rights issues topics. In addition, we made several direct interventions to the government and various ministries. I have been personally in contact with several ministers, the President of the government, members of the Parliament, as well as the President of the Republic. Our views have been frequently made into account by decision makers. For example, we gave an opinion that the obligation to wear protective face masks must recognize limited exceptions, especially regarding persons with different disabilities. We also called for a proportional action on the police during the anti-governmental protests and to respect family and private life, especially regarding the right of children to have contact with both parents. Dear colleagues, all through there are many more interesting and important information to share with you. Let me end here since we have limited time frame. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourself, your colleagues and loved ones. I'm looking forward to see you soon.
Before we go on, I would like to take a few minutes to allow you to link up with the interactive online survey that we have prepared for you. In order for the survey to give reliable results and reflect a realistic picture, we ask that only one representative from each participating organization take part in it. So, how do we access the survey? First of all, we recommend that you have two devices, one for watching the webinar, the other for participating in the Kahoot survey. We press on the link to Kahoot that we attach to the webinar's invitation. If you don't have the link right now, you can just look for Kahoot in your browser. You can type kahoot.it or Google the word Kahoot, preferably on your smartphone, but you can also use your tablet or PC. If you Googled Kahoot, you should click on Play Kahoot, enter game pin here. Later on, before we begin the survey, we will give you the pin number to enter the survey. So, hang on to your smartphones. The survey will start after 3 thought-provoking interventions. And now, we will hear from the Taxation Ombudsman of Australia on the importance of being flexible during the difficult times and the various ways in which the office has improved its ability to monitor, learn, and respond quickly to complaints during the pandemic. Let us listen to the Australian Ombudsman while looking at beautiful pictures from Sydney, Australia.
Hello, I'm Karen Payne. I'm the Inspector General and Taxation Ombudsman in Australia. I want to share with you some brief observations on how my agency, the IGTO, has risen to the challenges of the pandemic. International travel has been severely restricted as a result of the pandemic, and so I also wanted to share with you some images of my beautiful home city, Sydney, Australia. I hope someday soon you'll be able to come visit us. We'd love to welcome you. I want to acknowledge that these are challenging and globally unsettling times. Mentally, physically, personally, professionally and commercially, whether you run a family, a small business or a large multinational business. Perhaps most of all, what has impressed me about rising to the challenge of the pandemic is the swiftness in the response. This is in part, I think, because a real economic and health crisis was emerging. The IGTO was conducting a live test of our business continuity plans when we were required to pivot and respond to real economic and business continuity conditions. The pandemic has reminded everyone of the ability of communities to work together and the importance of everyone performing at their best. Although it has tested our resilience at times, it's also been a reminder of the importance of remaining flexible. The IGTO performs a dual role in the tax administration system. The Inspector General of Taxation undertakes investigations of actions, systems and taxation laws to identify improvements. The role of the Taxation Ombudsman, and we've only been performing this role for about 5 years now, is to assist and assure taxpayers, especially small business, that their experience in the tax system is a fair one. We independently investigate their complaints, and if we consider their experience is not a fair one, we exercise statutory powers to appropriately engage with tax officials and independently mediate action which will restore the balance of fairness. The IGTO's assistance in achieving these objectives is perhaps even more critical because the Australian tax system is being used to access and deliver financial assistance, economic stimulus measures. Our ability to monitor, learn and respond quickly has been important. Access to economic stimulus measures was important for business, especially small business, to continue to trade. Changes in legislation and resulting new administration has kept our team busy. Sometimes taxpayers made simple mistakes in their application form or relied on pre-populated information. Time was of the essence in ensuring a speedy outcome for these business to their taxation complaints. Our ability to adapt and respond to changing conditions has also been essential. In communications, for example, we adapted our information and communication technology platforms and work practices to support our team working remotely, to protect themselves, their families, and the community at large. In our operating models, we've implemented several measures to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our services. Updating our call centre messaging to direct complainants to our web form application and to use the formal ATO complaints process. Introducing an overflow complaints officer to better mitigate against complaint overload, and better use of internal data for managing caseload and other work priorities. We strive to provide the highest quality of service with our available resources and in the circumstances. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the IGTO team for their assistance in helping the community, especially during these difficult times. Importantly, the IGTO team want to help the community through their professionalism, independence and responsiveness. We understand it's important for us to all perform at our best. I also want to take this opportunity to wish you all a safe and speedy recovery from these difficult and challenging times. Thank you.
Let us move on to the province of British Columbia in Canada. We will hear how during the past few months, the Ombudsperson has given recommendations regarding the unlawfulness of 2 orders given by the government and how the government addressed these recommendations.
Hello, I'm Jay Chalk. I'm the Ombudsperson of British Columbia. Thank you to the IOI for putting on this important session on COVID-19 and the Ombudsperson. What are the limits of government powers in an emergency? What's the role of the Ombudsperson in investigating and reporting on the exercise of extraordinary government powers in a pandemic? My office's report from June of this year, Extraordinary Times, Extraordinary Measures, considers these important questions. Like most jurisdictions, British Columbia has taken emergency measures to deal with the health, social, and economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. In mid-March, the province declared a state of emergency. This declaration allowed the province's Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General to issue ministerial orders to prevent, respond to, or alleviate the effects of the pandemic. Some of the orders were clearly within the authority given to the minister by the Emergency Powers Law. But some of the orders made by the minister purported to amend or suspend legislative provisions in statutes. These orders raised important questions for us. Can the minister change the statutory law this way? What's our role in reviewing the minister's use of those powers? We investigated. Why? Because it's important to address these issues of public accountability, and we saw an opportunity to inform future legislation by providing a perspective that would otherwise not have been considered. From the outset, government challenged our jurisdiction to investigate. We rejected government's position and carried on. But in this investigation, it was important to reflect on our role as an ombuds, to constructively assist the Legislative Assembly and the public in understanding how the government had exercised its powers in the pandemic, and what government and the legislature can do to ensure lawfulness and accountability going forward. We investigated 2 of the minister's orders and found that they were contrary to law because they exceeded the minister's authority when the orders purported to suspend or amend legislation. We also found that the minister's orders did not include or demonstrate appropriate consideration of proportionality. In this case, they allowed others to change the law as well without placing limits on that power. We made 5 recommendations. We weren't sure exactly how government would respond given its jurisdictional concerns and its resistance to our investigation. But government did quickly introduce legislation that addressed most of our recommendations. The legislation validated the existing orders, established statutory authority and conditions for making future orders, and required the minister to report to the legislature on the use of those powers. There was significant debate in the legislature related to our report and the resulting legislation. The issues raised in our report and the work we had done were front and center. Despite the challenges, our report drew attention to a key issue of public administration that may otherwise have been overlooked. It's because of our distinct role and function as an ombuds office that we were able to have this meaningful impact and to do so in a timely manner. I'm very proud of the work we did in this investigation and appreciative of the assistance and support we received from IOI members. Thank you.
Last but not least, I am happy to introduce the intervention of our colleague from our neighboring country, the chairman of the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Commission of Jordan. We will hear of the challenges the Commission has faced adapting to change in work methods and of the importance of sharing and exploring international best practices.
Dear colleagues, greetings from Amman. I'm glad to be part of this important meeting, which includes high elite ombudsmen and human rights defenders, to talk about the most important developments and achievements made during the period of the pandemic. As we cannot deny the unprecedented experience in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are finding ourselves obliged to adopt a more ambitious strategy towards overcoming the challenges we are currently faced with. As a result, Jordan had to resort to exceptional legislation as well to activate it in order for the state institutions to be able to deal with it. Accordingly, Defense Law number 13 of 1992 has been activated throughout the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan with effect from March 17, 2020. This law stipulated in its second article that it can be activated within certain cases, including the spread of a specific epidemic. Jordan, as the case with many countries, takes into consideration that crises are usually an opportunity to violate the standards of integrity and violate the rule of law, which is one of the most important of these standards. The government, therefore, issued a unified system for government procurement in late 2019 in accordance with international best practices that will enhance integrity and legitimate competition and on the principle of fairness and equal opportunities. The Jordanian Integrity and Anti-Corruption Commission continued to maintain communication with public sector institutions using remote meeting technology to monitor the extent to which these institutions comply with national integrity standards and raises awareness about them. The Commission, being a governmental body, faced main challenges in the current COVID-19 situations in being able to deal with corruption cases in an efficient manner, especially given the limited capacity of agencies such as ours under a national lockdown type situation. However, the Commission kept practicing work remotely by receiving complaints, classifying them, and referring them to the relevant authorities in the country as the means and tools for receiving compliance and electronic intelligence that were resorting to citizens have still been working effectively. The new technologies, if used optimally, such as artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, in addition to switching work patterns to adapt to change. I'm confident that we will be able to overcome the COVID-19 crisis internally with the joint cooperation for the public and private sectors and civil society institutions. Finally, our participation in this international event is an expression of our willingness to share and explore international best practices to spare the world of any disadvantages and avoid social and economic crises. Thank you.
I would like to thank all the speakers, regional presidents, and ombudspersons from the different countries. There is no doubt that we have learned a great deal from each other as to how to cope with the challenges confronting us in times of crisis. And now, let's move on to the last part of this conference and take a few moments to answer an online survey. The results of the survey will be presented in real time and will provide us with a comparative review of the way ombuds institutions around the world are coping with the pandemic. For those of you who were picked to be the representatives of your organization, if you haven't accessed your Kahoot yet, please do so now. A short reminder how to log on. Click on the attached link, on the link that attached to the webinar invitation, or Google Kahoot, preferably on your smartphone. If you Googled Kahoot, click on Play Kahoot, enter game pin here. Type in the game pin number, as you can see now on the shared webinar screen. The number is 864-1858. I repeat, the number is 864-1858. Now you can choose a nickname. You can choose the name of your country or the name of your organization, but you're only allowed up to 15 letters per nickname. And you're ready to participate. Let's wait for everyone to log on. And while we're waiting, we invite you to watch a short video presenting the Office of the Ombudsman of Israel. Remember, log on to your Kahoot.
מבקר המדינה הוא גם נציב תלונות הציבור, והוא פועל באמצעות נציבות תלונות הציבור. הנציבות מבררת תלונות על גופים ציבוריים, ובין היתר על משרדי ממשלה, רשויות מקומיות וחברות ממשלתיות.
לעבוד בנציבות זה להיות חלק מקבוצה של אנשים איכותיים ביותר שפועלים, קמים בוקר ללא לאות, כדי לסייע ולהוות את הפה של האזרח בכל מיני בעיות או חיכוכים שיש לו מול רשויות השלטון.
הנציבות מהווה כתובת לכל אדם.
טיפול ניתן חינם אין כסף והוא נגיש.
צוות עובדים מקצועי ורגיש. שיסייע לכם במיצוי הזכויות מול הגופים הנילונים.
אתה יודע שכל דבר שאתה עושה עוזר לאזרח הפשוט. בכל דבר ודבר בחיים שלו אתה יכול לגעת ולעזור.
היכולת להגיע למתלוננים, בין באמצעים אלקטרוניים ובין בקבלת קהל פרונטלית, להסביר את עבודת הרשויות, להבהיר את סמכויות הנציבות, ולהושיט סיוע בפועל או לכל הפחות במתן יחס, כל אלה ועוד נותנים תחושת סיפוק אדירה של עשייה משמעותית.
ההון האנושי במשרד הזה ובנציבות בפרט זה משהו אדיר. לכל אחד יש מה לתרום.
לעבוד בנציבות זו מבחינתי הזדמנות לחולל שינוי.
זה לעבוד כתף אל כתף עם אנשים טובים, ערכיים ואכפתיים, על מנת לעשות יחד טוב לציבור.
הנציבות מקיימת בירור בדרכים שונות, ובין היתר היא יורדת לשטח כדי לברר את התלונה, והיא גם עוסקת בגישור בתלונות מסוימות המתאימות לכך.
אנחנו מסייעים לפרט מול הרשות כשטענתו כלפי הרשות מוצדקת, וגם אנו מסייעים לרשות בכך שאנו משקפים לה היכן הבעיות והליקויים שיש לתקן אותם, וכיצד אפשר לתקן ולשפר את פעולתה של הרשות.
הנציבות משתמשת בטכנולוגיות מידע מתקדמות על מנת לנתח את הנתונים של התלונות שהיא מקבלת, וגם יכולה להציג את הנתונים בדוח השנתי שלה, המוגש מדי שנה לכנסת ומסייע לציבור בכללותו. מעל 50% מהתלונות המגיעות לנציבות בנושא של שירות לציבור נמצאות מוצדקות, וזהו אחוז גבוה ביותר. בכך הנציבות למעשה תורמת לשיפור השירות הציבורי. על העבודה המקצועית של הצוות המיומן של הנציבות יעידו שלל מכתבי התודה שהנציבות מקבלת כל העת.
תחושת הסיפוק גדולה מאוד כשאנחנו מצליחים לסייע לפונים אלינו בביטול חוב שאינו מוצדק, במימוש זכות, בקבלת הטבה או סבסוד שמגיעים להם. אנחנו לא פעם מהווים מוצא אחרון עבור האזרח הקטן.
לקום כל בוקר בידיעה שמה שאתה עושה זה לעזור לאנשים, זה להוביל למינהל ציבורי תקין. כיף לדעת שאתה עוסק פה בדברים אמיתיים, מהותיים, ומוביל לתיקון מערכות.
I hope you enjoyed the video. Let's move on to the survey. For those of you who are not familiar with the Kahoot, I'll explain briefly how to participate. A question will appear on the shared webinar screen, followed by 4 possible answers, each in a different colored box. The colored boxes only, not the actual questions or answers, will appear on the screen of the second device. In order to choose your answer, click on the colored box on the screen of the second device, your smartphone. You will have 60 seconds to answer each question. When the time limit is passed, a summary of the participants' answers will appear on the shared webinar screen. The first question will be a practice question to make sure that you're getting this and that you're on board. Meanwhile, you can also log in if you haven't logged in yet. So let's give it a try. The practice question, it's very difficult. How is the weather today? You're allowed to look out the window for this question. Red, cold, blue, rainy, yellow, sunny, or green, both red and blue are correct. I'm sorry we don't have snowy here or warm. Okay, yeah. I'll repeat the answers. Red, cold, blue, rainy, yellow, sunny, and both red and blue are correct. You have 30 more seconds to answer this complicated question. I repeat, the answer was, the question was, how's the weather today? 10 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. So what do we have here? Let's see the answers. Okay, so the answers are 42% said that it's sunny, 38% said that it's cold, and 13% said that it's rainy, 7% that said that it's both cold and rainy. So I can see we have all kinds of weather around the globe. I can tell you that here in Jerusalem it's warm and quite pleasant. Okay, this is the first real question. It's not a practice question anymore. What did you do to make it easier for vulnerable people to access your services during the pandemic? Red, we relaxed our rules. Blue, we found new ways to reach out to them. Yellow, we are already accessible. And green, both red and blue are correct. I'll repeat the question. What did you do to make it easier for vulnerable people to access your services during the pandemic? Red, we relaxed our rules. Blue, we found new ways to reach out to them. Yellow, we are already accessible. Green, both red and blue are correct. You have 15 more seconds. Okay, let's see the answers. Okay, that's very interesting. 27% of you said that we are already accessible. Well, that's really encouraging because to see that you are already accessible to vulnerable people. I think most of us answered that we either relaxed our rules or found new ways to reach out to vulnerable people. And it is indeed very important during these challenging times to show creativity and flexibility in order to ensure that vulnerable people have access to our services. Actually, I think we heard today from some of our speakers of very innovative ways to improve our access to vulnerable people, such as toll-free phones, setting up phone calls, or reaching out to certain NGOs. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Did you change the way you communicate with the public bodies as a result of the pandemic? Red, yes, we now communicate by email or phone. Blue, yes, now we communicate primarily by video conferencing. Yellow, no, unchanged. Or green, both red and blue are correct. I'll repeat the question. Did you change the way you communicate with the public bodies as a result of the pandemic? Red, yes, we communicate by email or phone. Blue, yes, we communicate primarily by video conferencing. Yellow, no, unchanged. And green, both red and blue are correct. Yeah, 15 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see the results. Okay, 41% of us said that we now communicate either by email or phone, and 14% plus 24% also said either email or phone or video conferencing. I can assume that most of us held a lot of face-to-face meetings before the pandemic. And I would like to invite us all to think whether the change in the way we communicate with the public bodies has affected the quality of our investigation of the complaints. Has it made more difficult, or perhaps has it improved the communication in certain aspects, such as the speed of the response or the frequency of the interaction? Okay, let's move on to the next question. Have the public bodies implemented your recommendations more quickly during the period of the pandemic? Okay, we have red, no. We have blue, yes. We have yellow, we don't follow up on the implementation of our recommendations. And we have green, we have no information regarding this. I'll repeat the question. Have the public bodies implemented your recommendations more quickly during the period of the pandemic? Red is no. Blue is yes. Yellow is we don't follow up on the implementation of our recommendations. And green, we have no information regarding this. We have 15 more seconds. Okay, let's see the answers. I can see that most of you answered no, that the public bodies did not implement our recommendations more quickly during the pandemic. That means that generally the pandemic has not changed the way public bodies implement our recommendations. Well, it would be interesting to try to figure out the reasons for that. And 34% answered yes, that the public bodies did implement the recommendations more quickly. And that is very impressive. It's good to see that we brought the bodies to action during the crisis. And again, it would be interesting to figure out the reasons for that as well. Let's move on to the next question. Have your offices continued to operate during the pandemic as before, excluding lockdowns, of course? Red, work continued as usual. Blue, our employees or some of them worked from home full-time. Yellow, our employees or some of them worked from home part-time. Or green, our offices have been shut down. I'll repeat the question. Have your offices continued to operate during the pandemic as before, excluding lockdowns? Red, work continued as usual. Blue, our employees or some of them worked from home full-time. Yellow, our employees or some of them worked from home part-time. And green, our offices have been shut down. Okay, let's see the answers. I can see that 56% of us answered that our employees or some of them worked from home full-time. That's a significant majority. Indeed, this is a challenge to keep on working while keeping social distancing. This means that you've been able to provide the necessary technological and support and equipment for the employees to be able to work remotely from home. And that actually leads us to the last question of the survey. Let's go on to the last question. If you allowed work from home during the pandemic, do you plan to continue this practice after the pandemic? Red, yes, definitely. Blue, no, absolutely not. yellow, considering it, and blue and green, not relevant. I'll repeat the question. If you allowed work from home during the pandemic, do you plan to continue this practice after the pandemic? Red, yes, definitely. Blue, no, absolutely not. Yellow, considering it. Or green, not relevant. You have 10 more seconds. Last question. Let's see the answers. Okay, I see that 39% of you answered yes, definitely. You are going to continue this practice and work from home after the pandemic. This is actually, in my opinion, good news. It seems that the pandemic has caused us to rethink our way of working. It also seems that we have made the necessary adaptations to allow ourselves to work flexibly, either from home or from the office. We have come to the end of the survey. Thank you very much for your participation. We hope it gave you a brief overview of the experience ombudspersons around the world are coping with the pandemic. And this brings us to the end of the webinar. I would like to invite Dr. Esther Ben-Chaim, head of the Office of the Ombudsman of Israel, to deliver her closing remarks on this fascinating webinar. Dr. Ben-Chaim.
Dear colleagues, the webinar has reached its conclusion, but it has left us with much food for thought as how to pave the way for coping better with future emergencies. As we have heard from many of the speakers, the crisis has acted as a springboard for improving the service provided by us and by additional public bodies to the public, and it has opened for us windows to new worlds. Almost all the speakers spoke about the adaptations they have made in order to make their services more accessible to the population. Some of the ombuds institutions have significantly improved the ways of working from a distance, including computerized adaptations, and some of these institutions have made other adjustments, such as an increase in manpower, the appointment of an overflow complaint officer, a special web page, a toll-free telephone line, an increase in work hours, and so on. A significant part of the adaptations made relate to the development of technological and digital means which have improved the service yielded to the public. We have been witnessing the immense power of social networks in times of crisis. Social networks are a powerful work tool and provide a means for transmitting messages to the public. However, we must not forget that alongside the enormous benefits accruing from the development of these tools, including the use of social networks, reliance on them as the only tool for communicating with the public is likely to create obstacles for sectors of the population that have no access to these tools for various reasons. It is this vulnerable population that must not be forgotten, especially in times of crisis. The pandemic has highlighted more than ever the inequalities prevailing in society, with its vulnerable members being the most seriously affected. As pointed out by Mr. Tyndall, IOI President, we must give voice to the voiceless. From what we have heard in the course of the conference, some of us have been courageously protecting the rights of the individual and have stood up to government authorities, bringing about far-reaching changes. Each and every one of us must learn from his colleagues how to position himself as a source for advising and influencing government decision-making processes, everyone within the framework of his authority. This webinar has emphasized that an important tier in the protection of the individual's rights is the cooperation between the Ombuds institutions around the world, which takes expression in the sharing of knowledge and experience accumulated by every one of the countries. By joining forces, we, the Ombudsperson of the world, can promote the protection of individual rights, with the IOI playing a central role. I would like to thank the Ombudsman of Israel, Mr. Mataniyahu Engelman, and the IOI organization for supporting this groundbreaking seminar, as well as everyone who worked hard to organize it behind the scenes, both in Israel and on behalf of the IOI. I also wish to thank the speakers at the conference, the regional presidents, and the ombudspersons from the different countries for their important and inspiring words. We have without doubt learned a great deal from each other about how to cope with the challenges confronting us in these difficult times. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the medical forces, the doctors, nurses, and medical teams across the globe who have been bravely dealing with the virus and working tirelessly to save lives. We are learning from the news that vaccines against the virus are close at hand. I hope that these vaccines will enable life to return to normal so that we can all meet next year here in Jerusalem to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Ombudsman Institution of Israel. But even if we cannot meet face to face, we will make use of this newly established tradition and meet online in order to mark the special event. Thank you and good health to everyone. Shalom.